All right, good morning. My name's Skip Newberry, President and CEO of TAO. I'd like to welcome everyone to the final day of Techlandia Summit 21 and our keynote for the infrastructure sessions, Building Equitable, Resilient, Smart Regions. I'm going to be your facilitator today, along with Riley O'Brien. She's the Vice President, Events and Experiences, who'll be coordinating back-end support. And we're excited to kick off today's infrastructure sessions with a look at successful smart regions and use cases on how regions are making a difference in their communities by focusing on responses to current problems and how they're making their communities resilient for the long run. A couple of participation guidelines before we start. All participants have been muted, so please remain on mute unless a TAO staff member unmutes you and calls on you to talk. That's important because we're seeing a lot of interest in our recorded sessions on YouTube afterwards. We want to make sure it looks flawless and professionally done. So we're going to try and make sure that we don't interrupt Jean during her talk and during the Q&A. You may ask or respond to questions in the chat box publicly or privately by directing your message to me or TAO admin, and we'll monitor the chat box and respond throughout the discussion. We'll also ask you all to engage via the participant icon on your screen. And then we also encourage you to please engage with us on social media during the session and throughout the day. We're excited to share what's happening throughout the Techlandia Summit and to get everyone's takeaways from our events. The session is also being recorded and will be found on TAO's YouTube channel within 24 hours of the event. We hope you'll join us for the last session of the Techlandia Summit at 11 a.m. today as well, which will feature a panel discussion on building expanded digital infrastructure. A huge thank you to all the investors of Techlandia Summit. We appreciate their sponsorship and are excited to explore topics related to agriculture, healthcare, climate, environment, and infrastructure as we've done throughout the week. Those sponsors include Comcast Business, Fortinet, Grail, and SAP. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote, Senior Broadband Specialist with the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, Jean Rice. Jean, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you so much, Skip. It's such a pleasure to be with you today. And I have to say that this is a great conference. And I think that one of the best parts about it is the kind of the collaboration. And what I work with at NTIA is based a lot on collaboration. I work on rural broadband, trying to bridge the digital divide, whether it's technology or whether it's digital training and workforce development. I also work with interagency groups like the Cyber Physical Systems Working Group, where I work with agencies across the government to try to break down the silos and talk about how do we work together on various issues that, interoperability, cybersecurity, and a whole host of issues, including, kind of the socioeconomic element, and how does what we do fit together and work as a group. So that's a part of what I do. One of the fun things I get to do is manage the partnership we have with NIST, which is our sister agency at the Department of Commerce, for the Global Cities Team Challenge. And I have to say, through that and some of my other work, I've come to know Skip and Wilf Pinfold and others within the Oregon community. And I would say that not only are all of you leaders in Oregon, you're leaders in the country. So before I get started, I want to take a chance to give a shout out to those people in Oregon that I've been working with over the years that have just done a terrific job. First Skip and the Technology Association, you guys are doing super. And, you really do kind of get that multi-stakeholder collaboration going, which is fantastic. And Wilf, with your work and Skip also on mobility, leadership in that whole mobility area, and in the leadership of the supercluster, the GCTC supercluster for transportation. I mean, you've really taken that, with all of the places around the country who are doing the different projects. It's really remarkable. I also want to get a shout out to John Fink for his work on research for the disadvantaged in mobility and, kind of starting the Cascadia research pilot places at the university. So that, and I think, pilot university work is key to making these things happen in the world and get to the point where we can replicate them. I'm going to keep going. Sean Irvine from Independence. He sits with me on the leadership team of the Smart Ag and Rural Supercluster, where we're working not only on broadband for infrastructure, telehealth, education, but how does Smart Ag work? And of course, you all know Sean's work here, and he's a leader in, Smart Ag work for innovation now. That's new, and also in that whole kind of how does Smart Tech work in the supply chain for food. I also want to take a shout out to the Broadband Office and the Rural Task Force for the work they've done, the Oregon Connections for all keeping it going, and also kind of leading the way for funding from the state. And then Catherine Helms was this from the state, her work on state data clusters and hubs has been fantastic. She's part of the leadership team of the Smart Data Hub group that is now working with OMG on doing standards, which should make things much more easy. And the idea then is also to work with cities as well as other state agencies. I'd like to put a shout out also to Steve Corbido from Link, Oregon, with all the work they do, but he has also worked with me on the NTIA collaboration group on 2.5 gigahertz, working with tribes to help them be involved and get the 2.5 gigahertz licenses that the FCC had available. And he has done a great deal of work on that as well. So anyway, I have to say, Oregon, you're a leader, and it's good to be a part of this, this conference because of that. But what I want to talk to you about is how COVID has kind of worked to exacerbate a lot of the problems we have with infrastructure, and also just in response to COVID. It has been unbelievably hard for local governments. And what we've seen is regions have taken a great response. They have really worked hard. And I just want to talk to you just give you a couple of things that happened. Let me start first with telehealth. The University of Virginia has a regional program for telehealth. They go to places in Appalachia, they go everywhere. So they were saying, okay, where can we meet the next need in COVID? And they said, okay, what we need to do is to have telehealth kits that we can put into nursing homes, because that's where, and this is early on in COVID, it was kind of a response as it went through. So they did that. And they worked with their state broadband office, and they were able to place them in and get more help in the nursing home on an ongoing basis, on a real basis. And it was great. But what it did show is that some places just don't have the connectivity to make it happen. So then they had to look at cows and other solutions that would, come in for a temporary basis. But it did show where the problems are. We had one tribe in Washington state where there's basically no connectivity, but the people needed telehealth services. So they did a public Wi-Fi on the council building, and as people would come up, they would hand them a tablet. They'd drive up into the public Wi-Fi. They'd get their assistance, and then they'd hand the tablet back and go out. I mean, we are talking about people being creative to fit these solutions, and I just want to say, I think that by working on a regional level, it can aggregate demand so that you can be sure that you're not leaving a community behind, whether they're inner city community or a rural community. It's important to have that kind of regional focus, because then you can make a difference. Now, with the Global Cities Team Challenge, we started a Smart Regions Collaborative. What was it, Skip? A couple years ago, I think, and
Jean, it looks like you're on mute.
Okay.
Much better. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Let me see. Did you hear me talk about the start of the Smart Regions Collaborative?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Anyway, what that collaborative does is it puts groups so they can do peer-to-peer learning, and we can learn from each other. And I think that is the only way, especially when you're kind of on the cutting edge of what's happening and you're really at the point where you're doing testing and you're working it out, seeing what works. And this collaboration is based on multiple stakeholders. So we have industry, universities, cities, states, counties, tribes, kind of the whole host of groups that might participate. And we do encourage that kind of participation, that ones that cut across the silos, that cut across the sectors, they seem to work well. And we've had, had a conference last fall just talking about how do regions respond to recovery, because that has been the big topic for the regions the entire way. And we're super excited to see how they happen. Now, you kind of go, oh, well, what is a region? You have a large international region that you're working on. Some people are working on smaller ones. So, for example, in Arizona, the state has a Smart State Initiative, but they divided the state into 3 regions. Now, the regions will cooperate, but they have a lot of characteristics that are same within a region. So if, you're thinking about a new region or working on a region, it's kind of what works for the stakeholders who are there. Now, in Pennsylvania, we worked with the state of Pennsylvania to do a region based on supply chain and trying to get young farmers into the business. So we said, okay, well, we're going to make, and our goal is going to do that as well as make sure there's no food desert in the low-income areas in Pittsburgh. So let's look at the food chain for Pittsburgh. So we thought, okay, Western Pennsylvania, we're good. Well, they got a grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission to say, okay, what is it that feeds Pittsburgh? Turns out it's a 3-state area, multiple jurisdictions. And they said, okay, who else are stakeholders? They had an amazing number of nonprofits who were working on food in various issues related to food. They brought them in. They brought in some local foundations who work on food and pieces. They were able to do working groups. And it was just an example where you kind of go, okay, what's my region? And then you have to rethink it and look at it. Now they're getting further EDA funding to move along with some of their projects. But sometimes collaboration has great unexpected outcomes. So what happened for Pennsylvania is they had a distributor go out. So they had a number of farms without a distributor. And because of that network, they were able to get 2 other distributors to pick up parts of the one who left before there was any fallout. So there was no disruption in the supply chain for food that goes to Pittsburgh. So it's a great thing. And I think what you see is that kind of collaboration happening a lot. So for example, Florida had a data hub collaboration, and they looked at Southern Florida, and all of a sudden they went, hey, there are several people around the US who are doing the same thing. Could we collaborate? And so that's what they did. And now it's keeping growing. We've got, in the collaborative, we have more groups going. One of which is going is Colorado, where they have 22 cities that are involved, and they are working on AI projects for smart cities. And that has continued to grow, and they continue to add different kinds of projects that they do. What we're also finding with smart regions is that we have new groups that are coming in both from urban and from rural. So our most latest people who are at it is we've got Ann Arbor Spark coming in, which is doing a regional collaboration on mobility. And we're also bringing in TVA because they're looking at regions, their region and rural, and how do we get the broadband infrastructure needed. So once you have your region set up, then you can start to say, okay, where are the gaps? And COVID hit them out, I think, out of the park in terms of what our issues are. So we've had to have people dealing with how to fix it. So when it comes to, say, equity for tribes, we have a great deal of work on no access or affordable access. The Nez Perce tribe in Idaho has been one of the people who've been real leaders in that. They have worked with lots of funding agencies, lots of partnerships to bring broadband to their communities. They also do training throughout. So they realize that, if you have never had broadband, it's not like you're a kid and you grew up on it. You really do need to work through how to use it, how to do it. Now, the thing about that is, for those of us who are in smart cities, is that is also the case for any of the smart technologies that we're working on. So if you're doing climate change, like they do, like some of the things they're working on in Schenectady region in New York, you know that you need to get involved and have people involved and have them participate and learn how to participate. So for example, in Schenectady, they're working with the largest electric provider in the U.S. On how to use the conversion to lights. A lot of towns and communities are changing their light poles out to save funds, but how can we do that so that the city can hopefully complete its mandate of putting public Wi-Fi throughout the whole community so they can have affordable broadband. They are looking at it for how to support 5G as it comes forward in their area, how to do the kind of censoring, the array of censoring that you might have seen at if those of you who know about the Chicago, what is it? Something of things, right? IoT of things. And the idea is, okay, how do you censor for, let's say, air quality? And you're at the point where you're going, oh, air quality, we all need that, but some people need it more. If you have a kid with asthma, you need it more. So you'll be looking to the map to see where those problems are. So, it is a lot of exciting things happening. And once we see where the gaps are. Other gaps we saw are public safety and transportation. The Tahoe area has a region that goes from the California side to the Nevada side. They have a pretty small community, but in the weather or now during telework times, they had an influx of people. And so they were able to work on a fiber network that brought smart roads to the area. Because one of their issues was when the roads get blocked, you couldn't get first responders through. So they had to work through it, and they did. So there are just a number of infrastructure inequities, and there are learning inequities that I think that came forward. In the education area, lots of groups came forward. Schools, libraries. They put public Wi-Fi in buses. They put public Wi-Fi in public buildings, in libraries, so that people who didn't have access could get access. A lot of middle mile providers and R&E networks really worked on that, just like Link Oregon, NOAANet in Washington, Merit over in Michigan. And the goal there is, just to not have that homework gap and not to have people behind as you go forward. We also saw in rural areas, innovation happening that has helped when COVID hit. So let me give you an example in the Indiana area, which is the Wabash Heartland Innovation Network. They were able to get multiple funding sources, including a large grant. They were able to get other funding to kind of look at what are our needs and what can we do. And they worked with Purdue, which is a real innovator in the smart ag and the smart manufacturing area. And they also work with Ivy Tech, which is their community college, on how do we build a smart workforce once we get smart agriculture and smart manufacturing happening. And so that is kind of that nice mix of, university innovation, a community stakeholder group that came about starting with a task force, and now they have an ongoing operation that's going forward. And so they were able to put up an aerostat, which covers 10 counties, 10 counties, that's a lot to be able to get it. Now, they weren't looking just to go to the home. They were looking to go to the fields because they have cornfields and they want to make sure that, say, they don't put too much nitrogen in the ground, so they can just do nitrogen for those plants that need it. Those kind of health-related issues with the food source that are key. And then, of course, here in Independence, you've got the great new program that they've got going with putting tech innovators together with farmers to actually say, what are the farmers' problems? In mobility, I mean, Jonathan Fink's work is amazing for people with disabilities and with blindness. I mean, that's the kind of work. I have a friend whose daughter is blind, and I think it will improve her quality of life. I mean, these are the kind of things that we want to get to through our smart regions. We want to make sure we have the infrastructure behind us, and we have the training and the knowledge and the participation. So when you look at these great responses from all these regions to kind of like COVID and other pieces, we say, okay, now's our chance to have a resilient future. How do we make this work in the future so that we're not caught with these huge infrastructure gaps? We're not caught with the inability for people to work from home, and as workforce changes, how do we change it as people's movement changes? Kind of like for mobility, Dubuque, they tracked where people ended up even after they got out of the bus, and then they decided to change how they did their routes. So, I mean, we can use this transformationally to look at this new resilient future. So I took a look at what I thought were the top pillars for smart regions. What are the things that successful regions seem to have? And the first one kind of goes to people-centric design. How do you improve people's lives? People say, oh, that's pretty simple, but a lot of us come from technology backgrounds, and so it's kind of like, oh, isn't it tech for tech's sake? Don't laugh, but that is so true. And it isn't. What you need to do is find out what the issue is, and then how do you solve it? Once you solve it for one place, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a cookie cutter for the next, but it's a great bottom line so that you can say, okay, if I'm working with homeless in LA, how does that help me with the homeless problem that might be here in Oregon or it might be out here in DC? What is it that we're learning from the data, and what can we share so that we're all working together? I think that one of the people who really has taken that to heart is the National Science Foundation, because they have a Smart Cities and Communities grant program, which insists basically that the universities pair with stakeholders and pair with local governments and pair with groups to meet their needs. And so they can have an ongoing check. So I think that whether you're looking at, people working on co-design with you, or whether you're looking at just, having workshops and doing surveys, but that just making sure you know what it is. I mean, and also kind of taking that interdisciplinary approach. And that has worked really well for universities now. So for example, in the university here in Virginia, the George Mason, they're looking at how do you hand off patients better between the EMTs into the hospital. That's a lot of data for a very specific purpose, and it is looking to be improving people's outcomes in the long run. And that's sort of what you want to see, better health outcomes, because of what we learned from technology. So that whole people-centered design, I'd say, is the first pillar. The next one is partnerships. If you look at successful projects, they have a lot of partners. And it's just like, you want to just say it's key. So for example, in DC, who took the lead first in that was the Board of Trade. They said, hey, we want this to be an inclusive community. We think that some parts of our segments of our population, rural and urban, are going to be left behind unless we all work together. So they worked with the university consortium in the area, and they worked with the city organization, cities in metro city areas there. And they decided to form a new group, which started up, which is combined with all of them. And they work on all the verticals, whether it's health, smart buildings, which is also another key component. And, GCTC has a great new blueprint out on that. Whether they're looking at, I think they're looking at workforce development, economic development, kind of the whole host of pieces, but each one is looking at inclusion as a part of it. And some of your partners are going to be, you're going to form an organization. Sometimes you're just going to have a partner that has a lot of knowledge that can help you. So for example, NASA, which is another agency we work with a lot, they're doing a tremendous amount of work on aerial mobility. And how do local and state governments and regions get ready for the point when there will be aerial mobility? Now you're looking at drones. Tomorrow you might be talking about, actually having cab service that way. So they have a great deal of expertise. They're working with digital twins and other things, but they have an expertise kind of part of that might be part of your partnership. I guess when you look at partnerships, you want to find the right partner. You want someone who shares your vision, and also I like to say is a win-win situation, so that it works for their and it works for them. If they have a profit motive, that they get profit. If they have an outreach motive, that is met. Kind of this whole, whatever the vision is and whatever the piece is, how do they fit in? I think, we have a couple of toolkits on doing partnerships as well on our NTIA website that might be helpful if you're looking at new partnerships. But we do see that once you have a partnership, you also might want to look at a partnership that has a partnership agreement, because if you're doing something that has assets involved, has resources involved, you want to kind of, or is funding, you just want to see what the pieces are. So if you're going to build an infrastructure, who owns it in the end and who keeps it up? If you are looking at, digital training and inclusion, who's doing the, where are the computer centers? Are they at the libraries or at the community colleges? Where are the pieces? And then, that's the resource that comes in. Maybe it's staff, but however you set up your projects, partnerships seems to be great. The successful ones have good partnerships, and they see them as a working group. So, for example, Kansas City has been in the smart city world for a long time, but they have a specific group that's working on digital inclusion, and they have stakeholders, and they do meetings, and they do processes, and they do trainings, and it's a lot of work, but it works. And part of that is because they have great partnerships. Okay, so those are that's the first two pillars you've got, but the third pillar is participation in my mind. You need to have locations that actually work with the community so that the community embraces the changes that are coming. So you don't want to be somebody who's putting up, kiosks with a lot of advertisement if your community would rather not see advertisement, even though it seems like a great financial answer. So you really have to kind of look at, okay, what is it that is great for our community, and what do they want to see, and how do they participate? Now, many of you have done needs assessments or will be doing needs assessments. That's a good time to find out through surveys, through meetings, through individual interviews. That's a way to find out and how to get participation. But it's not just that, it's the long-term buy-in that's important. And so if you take a look at the project that Panasonic did out in Denver, where they had the state, they had the transportation system, all working together, and the electric, all working together to help a ground zero building, so that they could do a ground zero building with no climate issues. And it took all of that cooperation. But I said to the person, I said, well, what is the toughest thing? And he said, the toughest thing is keeping the partners engaged and bought in. And I think that is true. And I think that's something that we've been collaborating with on regions, because when we asked Mark Chris, what's the hardest thing he had to do with his region in Pennsylvania for the food shed, he said, keeping the stakeholders engaged. So that's something that, just want to keep in mind. Then there's the whole aspect of participation in what you're doing. So if you've got new ways of mobility, if it's not being used by all sectors of the society, you've got inequality. You've got to fit it in. A lot of times they'll have like green button programs for climate savings through the utility. Who uses it? The tech savvy. What's needed is training for people so that everyone can benefit. And I think that's kind of one of the things we're seeing when inequities and how to include them is it's not just over when you put the tech out. It is an ongoing piece, whether it's a stakeholder or a user. Okay, and the very last pillar that I was going to mention is privacy. I know most people would say cybersecurity, but I do feel like we do talk about cybersecurity a lot, but we don't talk about privacy enough. And privacy is a part of the trusted environment, and you can't get by into smart cities and broadband kind of infrastructure activities unless you have that kind of trusted environment. And part of it is privacy. So it comes down to a very nitty-gritty kind of work. So let's say that you're doing a mobility study and you're putting cameras up on the street corner. You need to talk to the vendor about what be very clear and have contracts on what information is kept and what is not. So it is a very important piece. We have a lot of cities that have been working on it. Portland, obviously, and Portland has done a great job also in the whole kind of bringing people in and having whole guidelines for participation. And so that and other cities have just done a fantastic job on that. And I think that it's key that we make it a priority. So for regions, I think the main top things are people-centric design, partnerships, participation, and privacy. So that's kind of the big picture. And what we're seeing is if people follow those kind of pillars, and it's really based on what people did who were successful, that you can make these kind of transformational change. You can look at predictiveness. You can look at how smart cities can transform a community. And I want to say that as you think about that, think of it as a holistic approach. So if you talk to any funder, they'll say, listen, don't start planning when you see that I have a RFP out. You need to plan to see what you are doing. So let's say a great smart cities plan might say, okay, what work are we doing in the roads? Are we putting in, and especially with new infrastructure money coming in, are we going to be putting in new sewers? Are we going to be new stream water? What are the things that we will be doing? We'll be changing bridges out. That's the time to put in, okay, what's the infrastructure needs? Are you going to put in your conduit? Maybe you have room for fiber. That's not enough. You need to know where those access points are, because that will make an economic difference in the future in terms of who can connect cheaply. It may be a little more cost in the construction, but it's totally worth it in the last mile in. So those are the things to think about, kind of holistic. How can we say our whole community is working on various projects? What can we all do to have a better whole and a kind of a resilient future, where if we're hit with COVID again, or we're hit with big fires, tornadoes, kind of things that we hit on a regular basis, how can we make sure that our infrastructure and our training and our workforce is ready? And I think smart regions is the key. And I really think kind of the work that you're doing in Cascadia is like right on target for what can be successful in the long run. So that's my little opener, and now let me turn it over to you, Skip.
Well, that was
I
great,
shouldn't
Jean.
say.
There's a lot wrapped up in sort of a smart region concept, and I think that was an incredibly succinct sort of exposition of it. You broke it down in a very understandable way. And just a few questions here, and then we can also see if folks who are participating also want to throw some in. But I thought it'd be good to start with, one of the key challenges to regional cooperation, as you pointed out, is really coordination among the various jurisdictions, state and local governments, keeping all the stakeholders engaged throughout. So I was wondering, what role do you see the federal government playing in helping to foster some of this collaboration, especially among state and local jurisdictions? And what are some of the tools in the toolbox, so to speak, whether soft power or incentives? How does that look from your standpoint?
Well, I think the the GCTC work that we're doing on smart regions is probably the highlight of what we're doing to try to help the smart regions think about how to work together. That, by the way, that initiative is done in cooperation with the National Association of Regional Councils, so that they also put the awareness out to all the regional councils that are out there. So I think that is a help. I'm really happy to see that EDA has been funding more regional activities from the smart communities and innovation perspective. With the Independence one that was just funded, they've just doing a couple more in Pennsylvania as well, and they are very excited about our regions. We had somebody from EDA, as you know, come in to speak to our Smart Regions Collaborative, and he said to me, I'm telling you, I do these all the time, and that they're on a different level than anybody else I talk to, because they're so organized and they really have a vision, as opposed to what should we do. So I think that is cool. I think that some of the money that's coming available from Treasury, regions can take advantage of. I think they can take advantage, obviously the universities and communities can take advantage of that through the NSF, and NSF is funding a new project to kind of support that collaborative effort. We're seeing if you're into telehealth, the FCC got more money. If you need affordability, the FCC got money for that as well. And USDA is great in terms of, what it does for funding rural development. And then NTIA has 3 new programs that I'm going to just take a moment to tell you about, which also I think is about regions. And as a matter of fact, one of which is the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. We got $1 billion for tribes. So this, there's nobody who needs it more than tribes. 40% of the people in rural tribal areas don't have technology, don't have access even to 25.3. And I know we all think that's way too low, but nonetheless, they don't have that. So part of it is to build infrastructure where they don't have it. Also to help support telehealth, telework, education, and other digital inclusion pieces. And we've tried to structure it. Applications are open now till September 1. We've tried to structure it so that the tribe can use the technology that fits their needs. So if they've got a 2.5 gigahertz license, they can use it. If they want to work if they need a middle mile connection, they can do it. If they want wireless, we're pretty much agnostic when it comes to technology, so that they can pick what's needed. And that's kind of unusual for programs. Usually they're asking people to hit a specific mark, but this is really trying to bridge the divide. Then we have another one called for infrastructure program, which is about 300 million. That one is also being available right now. Now it's for states or jurisdictions to work with a provider to go to unserved areas. And we're talking also rural unserved areas. Then we have a third one that's coming, which will be I think it's going to be pretty interesting. It's called Connecting Minority Communities. And we just got the rules out on that. And that's to work with tribal colleges, historically Black colleges, and other minority serving colleges, and to have them work with their communities on how they can bridge the digital divide. It's really more of the inclusion and training component. So we've been doing a lot of talking with AHEC and some of the other college organizations serving minority institutions. And I've been talking to them about how they can work on smart technologies and work with and maybe partner with other people from our GCTC or universities to get to the point where they can start working on, projects. Could be innovation for farmers and training. It could be, climate change issues related programming, or could be smart manufacturing, but different projects that they could work on smart technologies for this program. So I think this is some of the funding that's going to be really out there. It really helps regions. One of the things that we've done is in these programs is allowed consortiums, which essentially is a region because you have people from different, either different tribes or different groups, different cities working together. So we encourage that. So I really do think this approach is going well. I think, there is obviously more that the federal government can do. And, one of the interagency groups I work with is always interested in those kind of things. If you think something, if you've got ideas, we can always take that back. So we're always, anxious to hear from the field on what is happening and what works and what doesn't. But I'm feeling very well that a lot of people are saying, hey, yeah, regions is a good way to go. And that, this funding that is so, and we still have a lot of problems with that in the federal government, funding that's siloed. So, you can do it for one thing, you go to a library, but you can't take it to someplace else. Those are problematic. And, I hope over time that those will be worked through, but people are aware of it. NTIA and USDA had a interagency group on broadband and working really hard on that issue and other issues, one of which is permitting. And so now there's on our Broadband USA website, there is a permitting for all federal permitting, because that has been one of the slowest permits to get for infrastructures of all kinds. And so that we're working on. Also, we've got a group working on digital inclusion, that's interagency group. So I think that it's a big help. And I have to say that, they do encourage people to say, hey, if you're getting a problem with the program or anything else, let us know. I've brought up things that have come up and people try to respond. So I think we've got the kind of the space for collaboration. And we now, from the administration have a lot of support for affordable infrastructure and for infrastructure so that we don't have an inequitable distribution of it. So I think that, it obviously more to do, but encouraged.
No, I think that's really great. There was you really hit upon some of the various federal agencies that are collaborating, which is great to see, and especially given sort of there's been a parallel track almost before with like the EDA and their focus around innovation corridors, and it's been mainly an economic development outcome in terms of its focus. But now, of course, since the pandemic, you've got this proliferation of technology and a need for access to technology. And so the whole infrastructure piece of that is paramount, right? And so it's awesome to see the EDA is recognizing that and doing some funding that's saying smart regions is so important to this overall objective.
Absolutely. And I have to say that there's a lot of class collaborations with the agency. So when they have grants that deal with broadband and things like that. They have my colleagues, take a look at it, they give them advice. So it's, I think that is working well. And also
that's great.
On this tribal project, we've gotten a lot of input from other agencies who've also worked with tribes to help us kind of learn from the past.
Yes. Well, one thing that we've seen here in the Northwest, at least, is that you mentioned a couple of the drivers of infrastructure adoption. So one of them being food and agriculture. And another, of course, the need for greater participation and access among the tribal communities. And in both those cases, we've seen some really sophisticated and strong cooperatives where like the tribes here have one called CRITFIC in the Columbia River Gorge that includes all the major tribes along the Columbia Gorge. And they've got a lot of shared infrastructure already in place. So they're well positioned to receive some of this federal money to say coordinate regionally. And now they're looking at how do they connect into urban environments like Portland to get more direct consumer, sustainably harvested food and salmon. So there's some cool opportunities. And then the work we're doing with Sean, you mentioned he's an ag rock star down in the Mid-Valley, is really around leveraging some of the existing cooperatives from an agriculture standpoint. And I'm wondering if you see that model as cooperatives is something that could be encouraged further in this smart cities or sort of smart regions work.
I definitely think So as a matter of fact, one of the things that's been brought up on our 2.5 gigahertz group is, how do we get cooperatives to work with tribes, or how to get them to set it up. Last year, I did some technical assistance for USDA on, kind of new technologies and also regions. And I think that one of the things that came out of it was all of us having a much better understanding of how interconnected the technology was to the goals of rural development. And one of the things that came up is cooperatives. How do we work on it? One of the things we worked on, how do we get co-ops even interested in doing broadband? Which is what made me kind of excited about TVA joining our group. But I think that is definitely something that definitely have something to take on for this next year. But I'm just happy to see that there's so much going on in Oregon in that regard, and that the tribes are working on it as well.
Oh, that's great. And, here in the Northwest, you mentioned, of course, the Cascadia Innovation Corridor, which encompasses Oregon, Washington, and also British Columbia and Canada. And it's an opportunity to do something internationally, I think, in terms of a smart region. And I'm wondering, to what extent is there dialogue with, say, the Canadian government federally? And do they have similar priorities when it comes to sort of recognition of superclusters or smart regions?
Yeah, I think there's in Canada and worldwide, there's a huge interest in smart cities and smart regions. And we have a international group at NTIA, and some of the things we've done for ITU and for the EU and others is kind of share with them the best practices that we've seen through GCTC. And so we've got a lot of filings that have been happening around the world on that. And every place has its own challenges. And so, I would say that some of the discussions have kind of been a little more strung out because of the COVID issues at the moment, but that's kind of finishing and going forward. But it is key. And we have another group that's working with Canada, which is the Great Lakes region. They're looking to get the whole Great Lakes region together to work on water quality to start. And Defiance was the first water quality kind of test spot. And so they're working from that. And so they have a regional council from Canada that is working. But I would say that you guys are the furthest along. I mean, I remember, was it 2 years ago, you had some Canadian representatives in talking about Cascadia. So I think you guys are probably the furthest along on that kind of collaborative. And we're seeing regions, say, in Southeast Asia, working. And we see some regions in the EU, I think and obviously from what we've submitted to these international bodies is that we're really promoting also kind of the regional attitude, but also we also supporting privacy, and a bottoms up approach, not just technology from the federal level.
Well, one thing too was interesting how you were showcasing a number of examples of smart regions already underway in the U.S. that have a certain focus, right? So it sounds like, Florida had the data hub. There is a series of AI projects in Colorado, supply chain and resilience, telehealth. And it sounds like, there could be multiple hubs that are focusing on similar things, and obviously collaboration there makes sense. But I'm wondering if a goal in all of this is also to be able to share, hey, if you're interested as a smart region in tackling, say, data, you need to talk to Florida. And if it's AI, you need to talk to Colorado. And I'm wondering, to what extent is there a desire to create kind of a shared marketplace of ideas? The GCTC facilitates that to a certain extent. And I'm wondering, is there more that could be done there almost at a national level in terms of coordination? And what does that look like in terms of an end goal of success, if you were to define that, say, 3 years out?
Oh, yeah, I love that kind of visioning thing. I'd say 3 years out from now, I would love to see the kind of matrix knowledge base ability to work together at the federal level. I would love that. And I think GCTC is our best moment to do that. With the smart regions, one of the things GCTC does, for those of you who don't know, is we try to have on verticals like transportation, utilities, others, come up with a blueprint of what has worked for them, what you think works for them the best. And based on those best practices, then they put together blueprints. And the one you and Will headed up is terrific on transportation. We've got a new one out on both rural and also from the super cluster from Smart Ag and Rural, and we have one out from Smart Buildings. So those are good ways for other cities and communities to come in. I think that we're just starting on this effort to do a similar blueprint for the smart regions. The I3 group out of LA that has done the work with data governance and has done a really great product on that. They're also very interested in how to participate. And I think, we want to keep it also a multi-sector, as we go through. So I think that is going to be a great start. And people are talking about, okay, how do we have a matrix so that not only do you hear about each project, but if I'm interested in, a particular food shed issue, who do I talk to? If I have to talk about transportation, who do I call? And the more we have people like that, for example, on the I3, when they presented, I think there were 5 people that from different regions who called them and said, hey, we have a way that we could use what you're doing here for our own departments. So, that kind of collaborative approach, and that's one of the reasons I'm also really happy about NSF funding a group. I don't think it's announced yet, but a group that's going to support collaborative efforts in this community. I think a lot of it has to do with the people involved. I find that the people involved in these leadership groups really have the public interest at heart, and they really work, volunteer, they do a lot of time to try to make it happen. So I think for me, it's, getting an opportunity for everyone else to kind of work with the folks I work with all the time, which is how do you foster that kind of collaboration? Because I can see from our own Smart Regions group, we could do different work streams, but we don't necessarily have the staff capacity to kind of pull it through. So as the regions become more established, I think they also will have more staff who can work on it. But I would say my 3-year goal for this is that we continue with the blueprint and the collaboration through GCTC, that we work through whatever group is at NSF hires to work on that. And then the whole hope would be that at the end of that time, we have more and more regions starting and more collaboration happening. And from my point of view, that all comes back to what does it do on the ground? And are we making a difference?
I think that's such a great framing, as you started with the first pillar about, people-centric designs, asking the fundamental questions about how do you improve people's lives. Sometimes technology is not the answer, and that's okay.
Exactly.
You also mentioned privacy, and that's something that is coming up all over the place, like not only around the US, but internationally. And I think a lot of folks are trying to grapple with the speed at which technology gets developed on the one hand and deployed, and then also the slowness of legislation and regulation. And at the same time, are there ways to signal through legislation where you want technology development to go? And I think you mentioned something that I just wanted to underscore here, which was, starting with the community first and having them involved as early and often as possible in defining kind of what the problem is that needs solving, and then how the technology could be developed or used in some way to solve that problem is utterly important. And you mentioned some of Portland's work in this space. And are there other examples that you've seen where maybe the Florida Data Hub or other areas that you've worked with where the collaboration has been successful, right, in terms of community and local government or state government? Because I think it'd be great. A lot of folks listening in are probably going to say, like, well, we're trying to figure this out. Who else should we be talking to who's done this well?
Yeah, I think so. I think, it's like our previous discussion, depending on where you are and what your topic is at the moment. So for example, one of the problems, let's say in the Southern LA area, was transportation information, because while there's a lot of transportation, it's not necessarily integrated for the community. So there was a municipal group there that was able to use tax funding from for transportation to do a fiber network that went through like 39 communities or something like that, 30 plus anyway. And so that was highly successful. I mean, if you take a look at Washington, D.C. again, where they have all that collaboration, they are really moving on, several fronts as they go forward. I think out of Schenectady, we're going to see a lot of interesting things come out because, it's not like one vendor hits all the solutions. So, if you take this approach where you use multiple vendors to work together to get the solution that the city wants, we're seeing success. It is just, Coral Gables, of course, has done a great job. They have done smart city work, smart building work. And one of the things that I like about it is they're not just doing city smart buildings. They're trying to bring in the private sector's buildings too. So, I mean, when you think smart cities, don't only think the public sector. If you're going to do public safety, you're going to do health, you really have to talk about a whole host of buildings and other structures that you need infrastructure for. It's just, and then there are some who are just in the planning phase, and it's successful if you start if you start a nonprofit or if you start a co-op, that is a huge move. It's like Washington, when they started their first forum, that was great. If you take a look at Coral Gables, when they said, hey, when they made the leap from it's not just us, we have maybe 5 other states where they are also working on the same problem and we're going to work together. Same way with like the state data hub that Catherine is involved in and other folks are involved in. That's an issue where it's an issue in Alaska, it's an issue there, it's an issue in Illinois, it's issues everywhere and they're coordinating together. If let's say that they can get to the point where they have interoperable standards and standards for taxonomies and all the things that would come into these data hubs that would work with cities, with states, and with the federal government, I mean, it's going to be a huge boost to a big use of broadband capacity, hopefully spurring some 5G as well, but it will make a difference and people will no longer, a lot of times they'll get like a federal mandate, you must have a data hub. But that's kind of new. People don't know how to set them up. We're all kind of used to data lakes. So then how does that change? And I think that, that kind of, here's the issue. If you can get to the next level, it's transformational. And I think that kind of just taking that one example of Data Hub, they've made a great success by just in this last year setting up a foundation and getting this OMG support, which will bring in their own set of stakeholders to work on the issue. And then it could have an amazing result. And I think that's kind of what we all want to work towards.
No, that's great. And I know there was a question about like links to any of the things we referred to. And I'd be glad to follow up with you and your team afterwards and just compile a little, half a page or whatever of links that we can share out with some of the folks. Yeah. And, excellent. And I was also thinking, like, as we round it out here, I'm wondering if there are any sort of closing thoughts that you'd like to share to kind of take us home.
Yeah, I guess the thought for you folks, because you are the leaders and you've got obviously so many stakeholders.
Oh, go on, keep going.
That you have all the successful element. You've hit all the pillars, right? And now it's a matter of keeping it moving. And I guess I just want to say how important I think that cross collaboration is. It's kind of like, if I'm at the federal level and I don't collaborate, things don't happen, right? Same way with the state level, same with the local level. So the collaboration is, I think, building communities of interest, working with those communities of interest, and having clear vision and goals. I think that is one of the things we've seen for all the regions when they do successful projects, is they are able to articulate it and they are able to get the stakeholder groups to work towards those goals and have deadlines, but it's that cross collaboration, I have to say, I think is critical. And it's important for people to collaborate with us at the federal level, with people at the state level, local governments, and then you kind of hit all of the other sectors, your universities, your industry or associations, as well as the industry groups themselves. But I think the cross collaboration is, and then the last thing I would probably end with is that, inclusion is important. Equity is important, and it's important to put that into planning, development, and execution. So if it's at all possible to work on those things, don't forget about them, because it's very easy to kind of get moving and not realize, okay, one of our core values is inclusion and equity, and how does that influence everything we do? So I guess collaboration and taking a look at inclusion would be the two biggest things I could say are worth our working on, because eventually those two, I think, work on transformation and better lives.
Fantastic. Well said. I think those are excellent closing remarks. Well, thank you, Jean, for taking some time to spend with us this morning. Always a pleasure to have you connect with our audience. And like I said, we'll follow up on some links and resources we can share out with folks. And also thank you to everyone who participated. Really appreciate you spending some time live with us, and then we'll have many more opportunities for folks to view this asynchronously. And then also just wanted to say once again, thank you again to Comcast Business, Fortinet, Grail, and SAP for supporting all the programming this week. And we have one more session at 11 a.m. Jean mentioned some of the cross collaboration in the region, and I think that one definitely showcases some of it across companies working in security and infrastructure, as well as the city of Portland and community technology, all kind of sharing their perspective around equity and inclusion and infrastructure, and how we can kind of move forward coming out of COVID. So we're excited for that one. And thank you, Jean, for kicking off Infrastructure Day for us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Bye.
Thanks. Have a good day, everyone.